Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the Board of Environmental Safety Public Workshop, where the board will review proposed metrics for DTSC's Hazardous Waste Management Program. I'm Courtney Bailey, the board specialist and today's board clerk. Today, we are joined by the following Board of Environmental Safety staff persons: Swati Sharma, Executive Officer; Shayna Avila, Staff Engineer; Sheena Brooks, Public Outreach Manager; Lauren Chandler, Ombuds; Gregory Forrest, Board Counsel; Evelyn Nuno, Board Specialist; Linda Ocampo, Senior Staff Engineer; Firdos Permirza, Environmental Program Manager; and Marcus Raymond, Senior Environmental Scientist. This workshop is being live streamed and recorded. Your continued participation is acknowledgement that you're being recorded. Today is January 29th at 1:34, and the workshop is now called to order.
Thank you, Courtney. Will you please call the roll?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Member Bhatia?
Present.
Member Brostrom?
Here.
Member Gomez?
Here.
Vice Chair Strasshacker? Here. Chair Rizzo?
Present.
Wonderful. All board members are present and a full quorum is established. Next slide, please. I will now review some logistical items. Today's hybrid workshop is being held both in person and remotely via phone and on Zoom. For those joining us on Zoom, please select either English or Spanish as your preferred language option by clicking the interpretation icon located at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. If you don't see the icon, you may need to update your Zoom application. Next slide. If anyone experiences connectivity issues with Zoom, you can call in for either English or Spanish. The phone numbers are provided to you on the slide, and they will also be provided to you in the Zoom chat. Workshop materials are available on the registration table at the entrance of the room. They can also be found on our website at https://bes.dtsc.ca.gov. Next slide, please. A recording of today's workshop will be posted to our website in the coming days. To protect everyone's virtual space and networks, the Q&A function will serve as our chat feature. It will be used for individuals that are experiencing technical difficulties or are unable to make verbal comments. Please begin your comment with "please read aloud" if you wish to have your comment read out loud during the public comment session of today's workshop. All participants will remain muted until a Zoom host unmutes them once recognized. Only presenters' videos and screens will be shared. To ensure that all board members are fully present and focused on today's workshop, they are not reading or following along in the chat or the Q&A. At the conclusion of today's presentation, we will have a Q&A portion to allow the public an opportunity to provide us with comments, feedback, and ask questions. You can always submit your comments to us via email at besinfo@bes.dtsc.ca.gov, and we will respond to you directly. Please note, if you prefer to submit a question anonymously, please email us directly to ensure we provide you with a response. Next slide, please. So that concludes the introductory review for today's public workshop. I will now hand it over to Chair Rizzo.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, including our 75 plus people on Zoom and all the people to my left in the room. For some reason, nobody's sitting on the right-hand side of the room, but it's nice to see our whole team here as well. I want to take this opportunity, Marcus, your first board meeting. Welcome to the board. Welcome to the staff. Everybody be nice to him. It's his first day. Okay. We will start with an introduction from our senior staff engineer, Linda Ocampo. Then we'll hear from, our board metrics subcommittee members Bhatia and Brostrom, who will present the subcommittee's recommendations. This will be followed by the opportunity for public comment, feedback, and questions. So thank you. As I think you all know, we just concluded a closed HR session where we don't report out on HR, but all I can say is we love our executive officer, Swati Sharma, and invite any and all of you who want to compliment her along the way to please do so. But I'm not reporting out on it. I'm merely letting you know that it's always wonderful to see our EO. Thank you. And they make me put money in the Bagley Keen jar, but since it's my last board meeting, I might not do that. Okay, Linda Ocampo.
Now? Okay. Thank you, Jeannie, and thank you all for joining us virtually and in person. You got a few of us out here. The objective of today's workshop is to present the subcommittee's proposed metrics for the hazardous waste management program and to solicit public input. All right. I can get this to work. Next, please. Okay, so a little bit about the subcommittee. Senate Bill 158 requires the formation of board subcommittees to focus on specific issues, conduct detailed evaluations, and provide recommendations to the board. The metrics subcommittee was formed to develop and evaluate department program metrics in collaboration with the department. The metrics subcommittee consists of board members Sushma Bhatia and Ingrid Bostrom, Board Executive Officer Swati Sharma, and myself, Senior Board Staff Engineer. Okay, focus and board roles. So the focus of subcommittee work is to identify and report program metrics that help the board, stakeholders, and community members understand program effectiveness. The metrics subcommittee is responsible for shaping and evaluating metrics that are of interest to stakeholders through the assessment of existing metrics and a stakeholder engagement process to solicit input. The subcommittee has kicked off this work with the Hazardous Waste Management Program. And in spring of 2025, this year, the subcommittee will continue its work with the Safer Consumer Products and subsequently with the Site Mitigation and Restoration Program. Our collaboration with the Hazardous Waste Management Program began in April 2024. During this period, the subcommittee identified and evaluated the Hazardous Waste Management Program metrics currently tracked in DTSC's strategic plan dashboard. Also reviewed and assessed internal metrics to gain insight into its internal processes. Then analyzed the intent of existing metrics and when necessary, proposed alternative metrics to better capture the intent. The subcommittee also developed additional metrics to measure key aspects of the program that were not previously tracked on the dashboard. The proposed metrics formed out of this analysis aim to evaluate the program's progress in meeting key mandates and its performance around permitting and enforcement activities relevant to stakeholders. Following receipt of public feedback, I'm starting today and before and through March, the final set of metrics will be brought before the board for a vote at our next meeting in March. The goal for each metric adopted will be established following the board's vote. So a bit about the program. The Hazardous Waste Management Program oversees the regulation of hazardous waste handling, generation, treatment, and disposal across California. The program is organized into 4 divisions: permitting, enforcement emergency response, Office of Criminal Investigations, and Policy and Program Support Branch. This program is responsible for a wide range of critical activities across the state. For example, the permitting of hazardous waste management facilities, inspections and enforcement, emergency response, investigation of criminal violations of the hazardous waste control law, development of the state's hazardous waste management plan, and provides regulatory assistance. The proposed metrics we are proposing today are tracking the permitting enforcement, emergency response, and Office of Communication, Criminal Investigations divisions. All right, the shaping of the metrics is a collaborative effort with the leadership staff from the department, permitting, Enforcement Emergency Response Division, and Office of Criminal Investigation. We want to thank you all, you're listed, for sharing your insights into programmatic processes and for your thoughtful input on the proposed metrics. Now, board members Bhatia and Brostrom will go over the details of each proposed metric for the Hazardous Waste Management Program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda. And thank you again to all of our DTSC colleagues for helping onboard us onto these very complex topics and allowing us to bring forward an oversimplified version of the metrics that we are going to propose or leaning towards proposing. First, I want to start by saying that we've spent just under a year focusing on metrics for one program within DTSC or one division within DTSC. This is the Hazardous Waste Management Program division. So the reason I'm sharing that is for you to understand that the work that DTSC does is incredibly complex, and it took us so many months to fully deep dive on just one area. So that's one. My second disclaimer is that this is by no means complete. Ingrid and I felt that this was a good moment in time for us to bring forward where we are, share our progress, and share with you our recommended direction so that you all as board members feel completely prepared for discussion in March and a possible vote. And also the stakeholders fully understand where we are at and can engage with the metrics process and give us feedback and actively shape what we bring forward. My last call out is that because this process is not fully complete, we know we have 70 plus people on Zoom. This is an open invitation to those of you in the room and those of you joining us on Zoom to please reach out as you hear the content presented today and you internalize the content. If you would like to discuss more in person, one-on-one with either Ingrid or I, or would like to email your comments, please do so. We welcome your engagement on these topics. Ultimately, our intent is to create a set of metrics that really matter to stakeholders and that help communicate the progress that DTSC is making. All right, with that, Ingrid and I are going to take turns and talk through each metric. For each metric, we're going to give you some context for where that metric came from, and then talk about our intent in putting that metric forward. I'm going to get started with a few metrics and then hand it over to Ingrid. Next slide. All right, so the very first metric is related to permit backlog process. I mentioned earlier that we're going to oversimplify some very complex topics, so I'm going to start that process now. I think most of you are aware that facilities in California that use hazardous materials in the course of their operations and or generate hazardous waste have to get permits. DTSC is the agency responsible for issuing those permits. And historically, permit holders were able to operate on permits even if their permit duration had expired. They were able to operate on those permits as long as a renewal application was in place and DTSC was completing their review. Okay? So typically, for example, the permit duration tends to be 10 years, and that is, again, not a hard and fast rule. DTSC decides what the permit duration is. But there were facilities that were continuing to operate even after the 10-year duration had completed in situations where the permit holder had submitted a renewal application and DTSC was evaluating them. So this is why historically we had begun to track the number of overdue permits to ensure that they were being reviewed and permit decisions were made on a timely basis. But with this context, it's important to note that historically there were no mandated timelines for permit holders to submit their renewal applications, and there were no requirements or mandates for DTSC to complete the reviews during a certain time frame. So the very first metric here is permit backlog. It's to track permit backlog process. We want to know the number of overdue permits remaining per fiscal year. We recognize that there will be situations where it is important for DTSC to take the time it requires to make sure the permits are protective and are legally defensible and make sure that there's a strong community engagement process. And those might create situations where a permit naturally has to take longer for a decision to be codified. Having said that, it's important for us to keep tracking these overdue permits to make sure that decisions are coming out in a timely manner. So that is our very first metric. I have a process question for our staff. Are we going to pause at the end of each metric and allow for discussion, or we just keep for the board discussion? Okay. Yes. Okay. All right. So I'm going to keep going through at least the permitting portions.
Unless someone doesn't understand what they just heard and needs a clarification, core questions we'll do together at the end because there's an intersect between the different ones. So if there's literally something you need clarity on, raise your hand. Otherwise,
Just keep going.
carry on.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Let's move to the next slide. Okay. At this point, I'm going to introduce more contextual information, which is about SB 158. And I'm going to talk to you about the significance of this date that you see on the slide, which is January 1, 2025. When SB 158 was adopted, there were two key mandates included in 158. One is a requirement for permit holders to submit their renewal applications 2 years in advance of a permit expiration. And number two, it allows for DTSC to make a decision for up to 1 year post the permit expiration. Okay? So I'm just going to repeat that for it to sink in. The first one is, I mentioned to you historically there were no timelines for permit holders or DTSC to complete decisions. That changed through 158. 158 then said that permit holders must submit their renewal applications within 2 years and, submit their renewal applications 2 years in advance of their expiration. And DTSC, it gives DTSC up to 1 year post the expiration of a permit to make a decision on a permit application. These two mandates kick in after January 1, 2025. Okay? So that's why this date is important, because there is a historic backlog for permit applications that expired prior to January 1, 2025, when these mandates were not in place or are not applicable. And then there is the go forward process, which is what happens in situations where permits expire after January 1, 2025. So what we're looking to achieve with this particular metric, and we move to the next slide, is we want to track the number of final permit decisions made within 1 year of the permit term expiration. And we want to compare that to the total final permit decisions due in a fiscal year. The reason this is important is post January 1, 2025, if we know that DTSC has X number of permit decisions due, and they're able to make decisions, let's say Y decisions, then the difference between those two numbers tells us what the potential new backlog might be after January 1, 2025. Okay? So just to summarize here, we're trying to make a distinction between the old backlog, historic backlog, before the mandates kicked in, and what might become a backlog from this point onward, which is post January 1, 2025. And that's why this metric is valuable to us. Okay. I'm going to move to another layer of information on permitting. While all the DTSC permitting folks are here and they're still nodding, so that's good. That's good. I'm passing the grade. Okay. All right. Next metric. Okay. So far we've talked about expiring permits and we've talked about backlog. But because historically there has been a backlog and we needed to make sure that we're not adding to that backlog. But in our discussions, we also realized as a board, we want to move upstream in the permitting process to make sure that we are reducing the probability of any permit review becoming a backlog in the future. So in order to do that, what we learned, we started to have discussions with DTSC, and what we learned through those discussions is that DTSC had completed a Six Sigma study to identify what good looks like from a permit review standpoint. And it turns out there is a golden number, which is this 140 days number that was established through this Six Sigma process. What this means is that if and when DTSC completes their administrative review of a permit application and the technical review of a renewal application within 140 days, it is less likely to become a backlog. The big caveat here is that when DTSC receives applications, it does evaluate them for completeness. And during the technical review process, DTSC may issue these notices of deficiency, and DTSC may issue up to 3 notices of deficiency to permit holders, which could tip us over that 140-day timeline. But the happy part here is DTSC is able to complete the administrative and technical review within the 140 days. And when it does so, those permit applications are less likely to become backlogs, which is why the proposed metric here is number of permit application reviews completed within 140 days. All right, and that concludes the first 3 metrics that are all related to permitting. I am now going to have Ingrid cover the remaining.
Great, thank you. So we are going to move from permitting to compliance and enforcement. So the next category is around supplemental environmental projects. And to provide some context, a supplemental environmental project is a voluntary agreement with a violator to apply a portion of a settlement or regulatory penalty to fund local projects that provide environmental or public health benefits. So the intent of this metrics is to gain insight on the number of SEP applications and trend in the use of SEPs over time. And while this program is in place at many Cali PA agencies and at DTSC and has been for quite a while, this program has been historically underutilized and undersubscribed. Why this is important is because the use of SEPs to its full potential will increase opportunities for funding that actually creates tangible community benefits in projects in vulnerable communities. Oftentimes, you try to apply SEPs in locations with either close or that has a nexus to the community that may be potentially burdened by a violation. And information tracking SEPs over time will provide important insights on whether community outreach is needed to increase the number of SEP applications, and 2, whether facility owners are supporting the funding when SEPs are an available option. Next slide. So we have a number of metrics that will track the use of supplemental environmental projects. So the first metrics that we are proposing is to track the number of projects eligible for supplemental environmental projects annually. Now, projects are generally submitted by community-based organizations or nonprofits, and they are in a queue. So we would like to see the number of projects being submitted for potential funding to increase over time. The second metrics is the number of applications received and evaluated for SEP eligibility annually. And then finally, we would like to track the number and the total dollar amount of SEPs funded as part of the resolution of administrative and civil cases annually. Next slide. The next metrics looks at compliance rates for violations that have been issued. The intent of this metrics is to gain a better understanding of compliance across a number of different both violation classes, issued to permitted or non-permitted facilities, as well as looking at violations in vulnerable and non-vulnerable communities. We'd also like to see and assess the data comparing violations in vulnerable communities versus those outside of vulnerable communities to understand whether there are differences in the effectiveness of enforcement activity in those more overburdened and vulnerable communities. So we will be looking at the return to compliance rate, which refers to the number of violations corrected compared to the total number of violations issued. Generally, there are 3 types of violations issued, and they reflect the seriousness of the violation. There is Class 1 violations, which are the most serious types of violations that may pose a significant threat to human health or the environment. And we also have Class 2 and minor violations, which are less serious. The return to compliance rate for each violation type will indicate the effectiveness of the inspection activities in improving compliance. Next slide. So again, here we have a number of metrics to report on this issue. So first, the baseline number of violations by class that distinguishes violations issued to permitted and non-permitted facilities, and whether the facilities are in vulnerable or non-vulnerable communities. So again, by breaking it up by type of facility as well as location, we will be able to do some comparative analysis. We'll be looking at the quarterly % of return to compliance for each violation class, as well as a year-to-year analysis of return to compliance for each violation class. And with that, I will pass it, I believe, back to Linda.
Thank you both.
Thank you. So we'll go over our next steps here. From now until March, we're soliciting input from stakeholders. Your comments will help the subcommittee refine the metrics to be considered by the board at the March 15th meeting. And starting in April, again, the subcommittee will continue its metrics evaluation process for the Safer Consumer Products Program. So we're here to solicit your feedback on the metrics. The metrics adopted by the board or to be evaluated by the board will be public facing and updated by DTSC. You can provide your written comments to me at my email, linda.ocampo@bes.dtsc.ca.gov, or it's shown in the screen above. And for anyone interested in engaging in the subcommittee directly, please reach out to our public outreach manager, Sheena Brooks, at sheena.brooks@bes.dtsc.ca.gov. All right, so this concludes the workshop presentation, and I will open the floor for any comments and questions from the public. Thanks.
Thank you, Linda, and obviously our 2 subcommittee members. Courtney, will you open it up for public comments or questions, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're going to go ahead and start with our in-person participants first. So anyone in person that would like to comment or ask a question, please raise your hand and I'll call you up to the podium. Please come on up. And if you wouldn't mind stating your name and affiliation, thank you so much. Great.
Hello, Dawn Kepke with McHugh Kepke Padron on behalf of the California Council for Environmental and Economic Balance and other assorted regulated business interests. So thank you for the opportunity. Just had a few questions just about some of the metrics pieces. On number one, relative to permit backlog progress, my sense is there was kind of effort in characterizing them as overdue to be sensitive to continued permits and just that it's not that an entity is necessarily operating kind of outside the bounds of what's allowable. Just wondering if kind of there's been any discussion around, accompanying those metrics to better clarify from a public's review and public facing information, just to clarify a bit of that in the context of that metric and when it's shared, just so that it's not just a number that's just kind of standing out there with kind of a category of overdue without understanding that kind of that's still within the bounds of legal operation, that sort of thing. And I'm sure that's been thought through, just as something that came to mind. Semantics obviously matter, and yet I understand it's hard to convey that simply.
Is that clear to both of our subcommittee and Linda?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, very clear.
just want to be sure we're understanding your concern and question.
Great, great. If I may continue with
Yeah.
a few more. Great. With regard to number two, regarding permit renewal processing for permits expiring on and after January 1st, kind of similar to kind of the prior comment, just as it relates to the number of permit decisions made within 1 year of the permit term expiration. Just curious if the board, as part of this metric, given that seemingly is just a number, would envision some context also to be provided with that. I mean, I think perhaps overarching all of the metrics, I understand we kind of need to have some, kind of number, to be able to evaluate some level of progress. But I think for many of these issues, perhaps some context accompanying that could be helpful. Just, again, for a public facing community kind of perspective and understanding. Let's see, similar with number three around the number of permit applications, again, number versus context, any additional context that could be provided from a public facing perspective. Also really interested, in kind of the feedback you may get on number four relative to supplemental environmental projects. We've kind of heard just kind of anecdotally feedback over the years just about how at times this can be a little challenging to navigate and advance and the process can be a little cumbersome. We will be seeking additional information from our members just to see if we can come up with anything else that would be kind of helpful along those lines. But certainly something that I think would be interesting to see what also you may receive from other stakeholders and what have you on that topic. And then,
Okay.
sorry, one more, if I may. And then with regard to number five around compliance rates for violations issued, just noting that seems like some of these are related to permitting, while others, maybe it's broader than that in terms of, kind of violations. And specifically in five, it calls out non-permitted facilities. So just, wanted to understand, if it was the intent as part of those metrics and numbers that would be provided to explicitly differentiate between a permitted facility, TSDF type entity versus a violation with a generator versus a violation with a transporter, or is the thought that they are all lumped together? Because I think maybe that kind of matters in terms of understanding the landscape and helping to dig into kind of where there could be some additional support or engagement to kind of help address those. So I'm seeing shaking heads, so I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think on that one, I think there was an intent to segment them, yes, into their categories. And if not, yes, Linda, there was, yeah. Okay.
Great. I appreciate the clarification. And certainly if we're able to get some helpful information back from our members, we'll certainly be following up. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dawn. Any other in-person participants would like to either make a comment or ask questions to our subcommittee members or our board? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and move on to our Zoom participants. We do have a few hands raised, so I'm going to start in the order that the hands were raised. Chuck White, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Please accept my invitation to unmute and state your name and affiliation, please.
Yeah, this is Chuck White. I'm a consulting engineer. I work with Manette and its clients in many cases. I have a number of questions. I didn't know we were going to wait till the end because I'll see if I can regather them as I go back over your outline. I guess the first one I was thinking of raising is that not all violations are the same. And it's not clear how you are going to be categorizing the various violations that you're going to be using when comparing them to other facilities that may have violations, or some may have very small violations, may have larger violations. And how does that affect the ranking of the concerns? I didn't see anything in your outline related to for example, the degree of threat or the cost or the other peripheral ramifications of addressing the particular violation. There, I mean, I've seen them to have all kinds of sizes and concern about how significant they are. So, do you have any thoughts about how you plan on categorizing the violations, so you're not comparing apples to oranges? You've got apples to apples and oranges to oranges when you're looking at your overall timeline schedule.
I assume you're referring to number 5, the compliance rate for violations issued.
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole thing, every single slide has some degree of dependency on what is the size of the violation and the significance and the severity of it. If there was a violation, for example, of not filling out a manifest form correctly, that's one thing. But if there had been, for example, a stormwater leak from a facility, that could be a different kind of thing. And I'm just there's probably a myriad of different classifications of violations, and I know the DTSC has put some together in the past, but I don't know what they are now.
So we'll be looking at the different classes, so class 1, class 2, and minor violations. So we will be, tracking those separately.
Okay. And so I mean, it wouldn't make sense, for example, you to go rushing off with your hair on fire on a small violation. If there's maybe a larger violation that you need more information, but you might want to go with that more significant violation than dealing with a smaller one that may have entered the queue earlier.
Yeah, and I think that is why we wanted to separate it out by class, because we are, very interested in the class 1 violations in particular, and so we didn't want to compare. If we just put everything in the same bucket, we wouldn't
Right.
necessarily be comparing, similar types of violations and severity.
Have you thought about the categories you'd be looking at of class 1, class 2, class 3, or are those just the ones that you have? Because each of those classes that you've got are kind of limited in scope, and there could be a whole variety of additional variations on each of those violation categories. And I was wondering how much are you planning in anticipating that ahead of time, or just waiting to see what pops out through the process?
The classes that we landed on were the ones that, we worked with DTSC staff on how they track currently. And so that's what informed, kind of where we landed on the classes.
Do you think you'd have more detail on identifying specifically what those classes are as you move forward on putting more meat on the bones?
I'm not sure that I understand the question. I mean, we generally are using the definitions used currently by DTSC, and these are in fact what DTSC tracks now. So I don't know what more, how to better categorize it than how DTSC currently does, because we're not trying to create new categories or create a bunch of busy work. So we are just generally using what DTSC uses.
I'm just going to add one more thing to what Ingrid said, which is we are tracking data, and data is the first step. There may be a set of actions that come out of the tracking of the data. We are not presupposing what those actions are. We don't know. We have to let the data guide us on where we need to lean in as the board or as DTSC, as a stakeholder community. So just think of this as the very first step in the process, so we have the right set of data to drive decisions in the future. I'm mentioning this because I heard you talk about threat or risk, and I think you're getting to what is going to come out of this, what actions will any of us, whether it's the board or DTSC, take. At this point, there's no action other than identifying the right set of metrics to track.
Right. So, for example, on slide 4, the last bulleted line is in March, you're going to have a board vote to adopt proposed metrics at the March, that's 2 months away from now. When are we going to see the proposed metrics, or is that going to be just simply regurgitation of what's already in the regulations, or are you going to be basically putting out an array of what metrics are going to be viewed by the board in terms of looking at the individual facilities?
So Chuck, what you see in front of you is our first draft of what the metrics will look like that we present in March. We expect to get public comment today, and we expect that there'll be more public comment coming in between now and our March board meeting. We will incorporate those pieces of feedback, and we expect to modify what you're seeing in front of you today. So what we bring back in March will include not just what you're seeing today, but it will have the feedback that we will have received from all of you today.
Okay. I guess so. The burden is kind of on us to, not miss anything and make sure everything is included or not
Bingo.
included.
Bingo. Thank you. Yes. Thank you so much for your comment.
Okay. Continuing on, if I may.
Sure.
Let's see, where am I? Okay. The same kind of thing goes with the overdue permits, and this is like what's raised on slide 8. Something that's overdue that is a manifest violation is a lot different than something that requires a structural change in processing of the hazardous waste. And so I was just wondering how you would compare the various types of overdue projects across the range of facilities that are under evaluation. It's really kind of similar to the previous comment I had, is to what degree of overdueness is going to be looking at. Something that's overdue by a week is a lot different than something that's overdue by a year, and it involves a major structural change.
Chuck, this is Alexis. I thought I would, given my interest in this topic, try and address your comment. The metrics that we have seen on DTSC's dashboard to date are many, and our board is working with DTSC to try and come up with a simplified menu of how some key elements of this program, and in due course the other programs, can be measured by the public and by all of us. In this case, DTSC is making great strides in eliminating the overdue permits, the ones whose term has expired, but who, as Dawn notes, remain in effect.
Right.
what we're aiming for here is a very simple metric that doesn't look at degrees of something. As you had said, what if it's 1 week late versus 1 year late? We're just trying to get at the universe of those that are due to be renewed. And if that universe, if the denominator is something on the order of 75, 76, the team here will correct me, there may be none remaining that are due after a year. So we're not trying to say that it's a week or 2 weeks or a year. We're just trying to get at the ability of the department with the resources it has to keep permits current. And that's the goal of the permit progress category here. I may not be fully addressing your concerns, but the point is to end up with a metric more than a huge narrative.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. And that's kind of want to know how you're going to, if you have a number of facilities that have violations or have overdue aspects of it, they're all going to be different. And how do you compare one versus another? Because they're different facilities. They may not even be handling the same kind of waste. So I'm just, well,
Right.
I just,
I
I'll be
think we're not
curious.
going to get into that level of granularity because when you look across the 70-some facilities, there are huge differences in a hazardous waste disposal facility than in, let's say, some of the recyclers that are permitted. But the point is just, is DTSC able to work within the resources it has been allocated to work with facilities who are submitting their permit renewal applications in a timely way to get that permit renewed? And these different permitting metrics get at that ability to do the technical review in a certain period of time and to keep the permits current. And if we were to get into much more granularity, as we get into the other DTSC programs, we're going to end up with a 20-page menu of metrics, and we're trying not to do that, given what one might see on the dashboard.
And if
Thank
I
you.
may just add, I mean, we started off by looking at the existing metrics that DTSU is tracking, external, internal. So we started off with a very long list of metrics. And so a lot of what you're seeing here is kind of a boiled down version that we think is going to be most useful. So these generally are not new things that we're tracking. We have shifted them and tried to really hone in on what exactly the intent is of what the metric is meant to capture. So these are not new, with exception, I think, the SEPs. The SEPs one is new, but we had a long process of winnowing down. And so I just wanted to these are not things that we've made up for the first time. These are things that were really informed by what DTSC already has and was tracking. And in our sense, because there were so many things being tracked, it was difficult to really parse out, kind of the essence of what we wanted to see and measure over time.
So
Yeah,
I think, Chuck, I think
Yeah.
if you have some specific recommendations, of course, we all want to hear it. That's the purpose of the workshop. That's the purpose of this. If you don't feel like it would give you enough on your end to be more compliant or not have violations, the goal is to get these things done on time, to get them done right without violations, to correct violations and make everything safer for the people who live and work around these facilities. So that's the goal, right? And so we want to find the most streamlined way to talk about that. And from the business entity side of it, and I think Dawn addressed this, what do we have to know? How are we going to do it? What's our role to make sure we're more compliant? So if you have ideas to that goal, for us to not pick apart how bad is this violation one compared to that one. If it's a violation one, it's pretty bad. So we want to fix it, right? It needs to be corrected. And I think that's the ultimate goal of this, is to make it more effective so that they don't have to spend as much time parsing out 500 different metrics when the answer is pretty much in front of us in terms of delay in compliance or violation. So specific recommendations, welcome them. I know the committee will want to hear them. And I think more from you too, Dawn, because you've got a perspective that will be really helpful. Thank you.
Well, I guess the first part of the slides you put together was that last bullet on slide 4. In March, you're going to vote to adopt proposed metrics.
Yes.
But what are those proposed metrics? I don't see them listed anywhere. Are you planning on coming up with a list or referring us to another document that contains these proposed metrics?
This presentation. So for example, the first metric is like the slide that you're looking at is metrics to report the number of overdue permits remaining per fiscal year. Are you asking about what the actual goal is? Because those haven't been set yet. The board still needs to first set and adopt and vote on the metrics. And then thereafter that, there will be discussions on what is that goal? So what is that number? Is that what you're asking?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is. It just seems like it's vague. You're referring in general to metrics that aren't, at least I don't have the list in front of me. And at some point in time, you're going to have to, the BES is going to have to adopt these proposed metrics, but I don't know what you're going to be adopting or seeing. I would presume at some point in time in the next couple of months, there's going to be a written report saying, here's what we're going to be voting on.
So what they're going to be voting on is in this presentation. So we've identified each and every one of the metric. But if you're asking about like what the actual goal is, that's going to change every year, right? For DTSC, and that's going to be an ongoing discussion that BES has with DTSC that we certainly will report back out at our board meetings. But going back to what the mandate is for the board adopts the metrics. They don't necessarily vote on the goals. They adopt and vote on the actual metric. And so that's what's here. But we encourage you to meet with the subcommittee one-on-one because it sounds like you have a lot of ideas and input. So we encourage you to reach out to our operations and outreach manager, Sheena Brooks, and would love to set a one-on-one meeting with you as well as with Member Brostrom and Member Bhatia so we can hear from you.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'm happy to. March is going to be upon us before we know it.
Right.
How much time will everybody have to evaluate the proposed matrix as you have written out here? And I don't know I don't quite understand how that process is going to work, but I'll be trying to pay attention.
I think this is, Alexis, that the 9 things that are going to be voted upon in March are presently as worded in this presentation, as Swati notes. If you feel that a wording change to any of these 9 would be helpful in terms of clarity, we would very much welcome that input from you and anyone else. But we're just looking at that menu of 9, as you see, one on page 8,
Right.
one on page 10. I'm just paging through this if you would bear with me. One on page 11, 3 on page 13,
Are these listed as matrix on each of these pages?
Yeah,
Okay.
directly underneath metrics to report, and then 3
Okay.
on page 16. So that brings us to the total for this part of DTSC's program. And absent a change to this wording based on public comment, that's what the board will be considering when we get together next.
And Chuck, we'll create a summary of the metrics for our website. So it's all just on one page. So you're not having to go to all the various slides. So we'll format that and have it as a one page so that all the metrics are clear for the
Yeah,
public.
I would hate to see your list of matrix appear at the March board meeting, not before. I would hope it could be the best thinking could be seen a little bit ahead of time.
Right. I think they're here, but as Swati said, they can get pulled from this document if you don't want to go through the 18 or 20 pages and pull out just the metrics. The idea is
That'd be
driven
helpful.
by the reform that said there are too many things that take too long, too many permits that are delayed, too many violations that are not being addressed. How do you measure the progress on that? So part of what we're measuring, where will we be on the day that these are adopted? And then over time, are we improving? Are things getting better? Are we reducing the backload? Are the violations being dealt with? So if you know you have a backlog, you know things have been delayed for a variety of reasons on all sides of the issue, the goal is to tighten that up, to have things be done in a timely manner, resolved in a timely manner, so that anything that isn't resolved is clearly a big issue. That right now it's overwhelming, there are so many. So the goal is to clean it up. And I'm sure you want that. You don't want it hanging over the business's head that they're in violation and they're delayed and, and DTSC is having to monitor. We want to clean it up. That's the goal.
Yeah, and that's what.
Okay, then we're on the same page. We can,
Great.
any other questions down there?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for your comments, Chuck. And I believe our public outreach manager, Sheena Brooks, did message you with her contact information to follow up with more questions or comments for the committee. So we will go ahead and continue on with our other raised hands. Just a reminder, you can raise your virtual hands through the Zoom app, or you can press *9 on your phone keypad to raise your virtual hand. Next commenter, we have Eric Nolan. Eric, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Please accept my invitation and go ahead and ask your questions or provide feedback.
Great. Invitation accepted. Thank you. Good afternoon, board. And I want to start off first by saying, of course, clearly I wasn't in the HR meeting, but I want to say congratulations to everyone on the board. I think you're doing a fantastic job. And I think the last couple of years of the work of this board has been very important to the state of California. And I think right now, kind of in the political environment that we're in now, I think it's so important that California stay strong and work to continue its efforts in hazardous waste management, environmental justice, safer chemicals. I mean, we've got to really stay the course. So I want to say thank you to all of you for helping us along that way. And Chair Rizzo, it's too bad that this is your last meeting. I want to say congratulations to you too, and thank you so much for all you've done for the board and taking the leadership throughout these last years from the very beginning. So thank you for that, and I wish you the best as you continue on.
Thank you, Eric. Much appreciated. And I know we all appreciate that compliment. It is. We've been stood up for 3 years now, and I feel like we've got our sea legs, and it's time for me to retire.
Retire. I like that. Good for you. Good for you. Okay. So my comments on this, and again, I guess maybe I'm saying a lot of appreciative things here, but I do appreciate what DTSC has done on the website with the strategic plan, with the dashboard for all the metrics that are currently in place. I really do like that dashboard. I think it's very effective. It's a very good visual tool, and it provides a lot of good data. And I think that's important for the public to be able to access that and see how things are going in the world of hazardous waste. So I hope that we continue that. That's one thing I would say. Let's keep that available to the public. Let's make sure that it's clear. I love some of the little drop downs that you can drop and get explanations to each one, what each one of those metrics represents and how it's interpreted. So a lot of really good stuff there. And I would also caution on winnowing too much. That comment was made here, and I want to be careful with that, because I think a lot of that information is very good. I recognize that it can be a lot, and maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm a data person, and I like these sorts of things, and like to get down into the data quite a bit. And I think I'll always be that way. But I just want us to be careful of removing too much off of those metrics. I think they make for some great KPIs. I love the idea of setting goals around these, so that we can track performance of DTSC and performance of the community, and making sure that everyone in the community has transparent view of how the agency is doing. So that would be one of my recommendations to start with, is let's be careful of winnowing that too much. I want to make sure that we are able to see much of that information. A lot of it is really good information. I would also agree with most of the recommendations here of the committee. I would say with the compliance rates, I do like the idea of breaking that down between vulnerable versus non-vulnerable communities, how those compliance rates relate to each one of those types of communities. And I also do agree with breaking it out by the class of violations. So class 1 versus class 2 versus minor, I think that would be very effective, a very good thing to see, and to see how priorities are being apply to each one of those classes to see, where we're going to make sure that those violations are being taken care of. I would also recommend maybe another breakout of generators versus TSDs. I think, I think with permitted facilities, we talk a lot about permitted facilities, but generation is so huge in the state, and we really need to do a lot of work around the generation side too. So getting that picture of generation versus TSDs, I think, would be helpful to a lot of folks. And on the permitting side too, I think I'd like to see those breakdowns as well. Especially with permit backlog, how's that backlog affected, particularly with the vulnerable versus non-vulnerable communities? So if we could see that breakdown there as well, I think that would be helpful. And then I do also agree with the addition of the SEPs. I would like to see, information there on how SEPs are progressing. If there are, the first commenter commented about the backlog in SEPs and how difficult it can be to accomplish SEPs and get those taken care of. I think it would be really good to track that and see what the progress is on those. And then the last thing I'd like to say, I'm a big proponent of our Safer Chemicals program the consumer program. I want us to see us really emphasize that as we go forward. I know that the metric discussion on that is coming up in the near future, but I just want to add in, if we could, there are a couple of metrics already tracked on the dashboard. I think I'd like to see more expansion of what we're tracking there, particularly with how we're doing with reducing various types of hazardous waste streams. Are we having an impact there? Are waste streams decreasing either by generators or TSDs? I mean, how's that going? And again, how's that going with the various types of communities? So again, I want to say thank you to all of you, and I appreciate your time. I may be providing some written comments as well, but those will be my comments for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. And we always appreciate your comments, and I'm sure you'll have more thoughts when you put it in writing, and that'll be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are going to move on to our next commenter. The phone number area code starts with 814. We're going to ask you to unmute. Please accept my invitation to unmute, and you can ask your question or provide your comments. Thank you.
My comment is it's very good that you're going to check and measure for the compliance rates for violations and examine the effectiveness of enforcement activity in vulnerable communities versus and outside the vulnerable communities. But how many companies are not complying right now? What's the names of the companies that are not in compliance? The second question is, I've seen a lot of land use restrictions on some of these sites around Richmond, around Chevron there. And land use restrictions and also voluntary cleanups and things. Do you think the water is affected? Like, did the water? Did some of the water pollution come from Chevron or?
Oh.
And I'm still trying. I had a lot of questions here. I'm still trying to understand the.
Sure, and
still trying to understand all the information.
And some of the items you mentioned, we will be discussing at tomorrow's board meeting.
All right.
So,
Time out a minute, Lauren. Okay. Courtney, rather. Time out, Courtney.
Okay.
I think Sushma wanted to address that. Okay.
Thank you. So I've heard one question and then maybe two questions. One is, where can we find compliance rate information for vulnerable and non-vulnerable communities today? I believe DTSC will have that information. can anyone from DTSC, is there a website where community members can find, can Wayne, I'm inviting Wayne from DTSC to come share with us where we can find this information today.
Chair Rizzo, members of the board. Yes, most of the information about enforcement is online on EnviroStore. So if you go to the EnviroStore website, you can pick any facility and look at their compliance history. The things that are not on there are current enforcement activities that are still undergoing review and processing. But most of the historical compliance histories of all permitted facilities are on EnviroStore.
Thank you.
When I looked up Chevron Environmental Management Company, nothing came up in EnviroStore unless I spelled it wrong. Like a lot of other Chevron sites in Richmond, there's several of them.
That may be because Chevron Environmental Management is not the refinery that is Chevron. And so Chevron has a number of different facilities around the state. And I don't want to cut off the question you may have, but it can be hard. If you want to know if the refinery itself is in compliance with the permitted requirements or with separately the other agencies like the Bay Area Air District or other agency requirements, we could follow up through Sheena Brooks.
Actually, our
yes,
has your
Ombuds, I was
contact
going
info.
to say, I'd like to ask Lauren,
We're on it already.
we're on it
so-
already, so we will get you help in looking for that information. You will hear back from Lauren, our ombuds, and or some combination of the wisdom in the room.
Will the refinery itself be discussed tomorrow or the other Chevron facilities?
Tomorrow, when we discuss the permits report that has been prepared, the facility, the Chevron Environmental Management Facility, is not the Chevron refinery. It's a different facility with a separate permit.
Where is it located?
It's situated in Richmond, California. Are you in the that part of the East Bay?
No, but I want to know where it is so I can look at it in the map.
You know, what we'll do is we'll have Lauren email you the details for both the Chevron EnviroStore link as well as the location. So that way, I know Lauren has your contact info. So Lauren will be in touch with you to provide that information.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be busy tomorrow morning. I'll be working and I'll be very busy, so don't call in the morning.
Okay, thank you so much for your
Great.
comments today. Appreciate it.
Any other comments or
Thanks.
questions? Okay. Wonderful. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next caller. Thank you so much. Next caller, Angela, has her virtual hand raised. Angela, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Please accept my invitation and state your name and affiliation, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Angela Johnson-Mazzaros, and I am with Earth Justice. And I see that Chuck is back in the queue, so that's interesting. So I have a couple of questions, and I'm going to probably follow up in writing. So, you know, there's a saying that if you don't count it, it doesn't count. And so I want to raise this as we're thinking about the number of metrics that we have and what's being tracked. I heard the conversation about wanting to streamline the number of metrics that that are being tracked, and I think that starts to raise can raise some difficulties because if you're not tracking it, it doesn't count. And it seems to me that the metrics that are being proposed here are essentially getting at two issues, and that is to say that they prioritize two issues for the entire permitting division above all the other issues. So as I understand what's been proposed, the permitting division has one thing to track, and that is whether or not it's able to issue permits within 1 year of their expiration. And there are a couple of metrics that get to that same thing, but that's the issue. And it seems like there are more things that happen in that division that are important than just whether they are able to make that happen. Not that that's unimportant, but I guess my question is that the only important thing? And so, for example, there may be metrics to track around around what does the public comment period look like? What documents were available to the community? How long does how did they support engagement? There may be other things that are important, and I don't have the answers to all of those questions. But I do want to very strongly suggest that there's got to be more importance to what happens in the permitting division than whether or not they're able to issue a permit within a 3-year time frame. And then the second, there are some metrics that are being proposed for enforcement, the 2 enforcement divisions. And really, those metrics, to my understanding, are raising the question of how does the regulated community respond when violations are issued? And so that gets broken down into a couple of kinds of metrics. Do people ask for SEPs, and do SEPs get issued? And how long does it take for industry to return to compliance after a violation's been issued? So both of those things are about how does the industry respond to a violation that's been issued? And surely those things are important. However, here again, I want to suggest there are other things that are also important. So for example, how many inspections happens at these facilities? What's the time frame for those things? We know that that's going to tie into other things that are important, like the violation scoring procedure. What kinds of things are happening? Do we see things that are happening across the regulated entities that DTSC should be paying attention to around compliance and engagement? It just feels like there are many more things that we could and should understand than whether or not the regulated community decides that when it's going to return to compliance, and whether they decide they're going to voluntarily engage in a SIP with the impacted community, And if we're going to track engagement and SEPs as something that's important, what kinds of SEPs? What does industry voluntarily decide it's willing to do in impacted communities? So it feels like there are lots of it feels like it feels like there's a conversation around what are the things that are important. And once we start turning important things into metrics, the practical reality can be that other things that are important are no longer tracked, and therefore the information, not only is the information lost, but actually the focus on those things is lost. And so I guess the too long didn't read of this is metrics can be very important for understanding things that need to be understood. And the failure to turn something into a metrics can mean that people stop paying attention to it. And I'm just not sure that these two things, can DTSC get through its permit issuance in 3 years? And what does the regulated community do when it receives a violation are the two most important things for permitting and enforcement to track. And so there's that. The next thing that I would say is I heard this conversation about the difference between the metrics and the goals. And I have sort of two questions about that. I would love to hear a little bit more about how you think about what's the difference between a metrics and a goal. In my experience, the two were the other way. First, you decide what your goals are, and then you decide your progress toward it. And so I would just love to hear how you're thinking about those two terms and how you're using them. I have a view about it, but I would just be interested to hear what your thinking is on that. And then the final thing that I would say is I'm wondering how long these metrics persist. So let's say you choose these metrics that you've outlined here in this presentation. Is that something that's going to be reviewed annually as different things happen? Or how do you understand this metric setting process to fit into the broader work of both the BES and the agency?
Well, thank you, Angela. That was a robust set of notes that we all took, so I appreciate you as always. I just want to give two overarching pieces that I think are relevant here. The DTSC priorities that Director Butler has put forth and that we're working off are something for us to all loop back in and pay attention to and see if in those priorities for this year or going forward as we do priorities for the next calendar year, are we putting the goals in there? Because the priorities reflect the goals. And so I think that is important for us to do a double check on the priorities and see, because the board did approve the priorities with feedback and engagement from the public on the director's priorities. The other thing that drives goals is 158. And that drives board goals very significantly. And so getting this cleaned up is a priority for the board. And when we discuss tomorrow board priorities for next year, I'm certainly welcome to hear more feedback on that. Now, those are the two bigger views of it, but I think our metrics committee will want to respond to your specifics. And I see Swathi as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. I'm going to make two quick comments to add to what Jeannie said. At a principal level, when we set out to do this exercise, we talked a lot about outputs versus outcomes. The initial hypothesis was that surfacing information on a lot of outputs can cloud out what is critically important by way of an outcome. So at a principal level, what you're seeing is we try to get down to the outcomes that DTSC is driving. And we've also had conversations with DTSC about surfacing the output level information to the board. Having said that, your point is well taken that if you want to see more information, and specifically if there's information included in the KPI dashboard or otherwise that you would like to see, we want to hear about them. So we will look for your written feedback. The second, again, principle we used was what is within the purview of the permitting department, because there's also OEE and other departments that drive, for example, public engagement. So we try to tease out what is within the purview of permitting or within HWMP that we can discuss and propose for this level of discussion. Those are my two comments.
So,
go ahead.
Oh.
Yeah, I want to give some thought to, kind of the tracking of more data, and what we Yeah, what we want to do about tracking and having more data available, as well as, really wanting to focus on outputs. So I think, I'm feeling a little bit of tension there, and I'd like to have further conversation about that particular issue. Yeah, I'll also agree that, we wanted to assess community engagement as its own program area, because we do want to do a deeper dive on really figure out, what are the proper metrics to track in terms of, is DTSE, doing a good job or meeting goals around outreach engagement. So we want to spend a considerable amount of time on that separately. A point well taken in terms of tracking what types of SEPs. I think that would be interesting. I myself have a particular interest in inspections, and I do want to talk more about the board about what we do about inspections and monitoring that over time. And I really also appreciate the comment about, how long do these metrics last? Are we revisiting this? Is this an iterative process? So yeah, thanks for the comments. And I think it gives us a lot of food for thought.
Also, I know April Rainey from the Enforcement Division, Enforcement Supervisor, had a few comments. So April, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
First of all, I want to say thank you for everybody that is providing comments. It's been very helpful and interesting. I especially am interested in the comments about the SEP and how, how do we track which SEPs are being implemented and maybe why, and then also the industry, from the industry's perspective, the processes and the issues that you all have identified, because we are trying to streamline and improve our SEP process from beginning to end. So understanding the limitations there would be helpful as we can try to work through that and make it a simpler process. But kind of to Angela's comments, we do and are aware of the various inspections that we do. We do have, we've been modernizing our process in order to be better, be more transparent to the public, make things a little simpler for our inspectors. And so we currently just released was an EERD live inspection map, which I just posted the link in the chat too. And at that link, you'll be able to see as our inspections are being conducted, you'll be able to identify the location of an inspection, and you can see all the different types of inspections that are occurring throughout the state, as well as there's links there to public EnviroStore to make it easier to get to the EnviroStore the data or the information about those facilities. So hopefully that is helpful for you, Angela, to be able to see the amount of work that's going on from DTSC. As this current fiscal year, we're doing lots of inspections, and so we do have a presence out there. We do keep track of enforcement and the various we keep track of compliance and what's going on across the communities. I think how do we get that information to the public is very difficult because that's not necessarily a number. So thinking that through would be something we could consider in the future. But I just wanted to say thank you, and also to let you know about our live inspection map, and appreciate your guys' time here. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We have another resource now. Thank you.
So can I just note back two things? One is if one of the things you're really trying to lean into here is outputs versus outcomes, it seems to me that really thinking about these metrics around SEPs is going to be important, because those things are entirely voluntary. That's not driven by DTSC, right? So DTSC does an inspection, there's some violations, there's some conversations about returning to compliance, and then there starts to be questions about whether or not some of the penalty monies can be shifted into some kind of a SEP instead of going into some generalized fund, right? So and my understanding, my belief is that the regulated entity gets to decide whether it wants to do a SEP or not. It gets to choose which, right? So the applications question is a question about who has submitted a request to DTSC to be considered as one of the potential SEP recipients, but that's not a DTSC project to go out necessary. Well, I guess the question is, do we think that DTSC's resources should be used to go and find people to apply for these kinds of things, right? So I just, so I think that the SEP question is interesting, and I think that there is some, there's some conversation to be had about how it fits into the overall project. And I thank you, April, for jumping in and sharing this inspection map. I look forward to taking a look at that. And I just wonder if thinking about how do you provide this kinds of information in a way that's more transparent and direct, right? Because right now, the project is that if you wanted to understand the kinds of inspections that are happening, then you have to go to the map and you have to figure it out. And it's a lot of information. And I don't mean to say that it's your job to make life uncomplex, because life is complex. But I do wonder if there's something to be tracked in the context of all of this work that's happening that helps to provide some visibility into the decision making and to the way things are working in the enforcement division, right? Which facilities, how do we see patterns? Do we see things that have lots of violations, things that are never violated, facilities that don't get visited, facilities that are visited a lot, and just be able to think about the work of enforcement in a way that allows us to be more robust. And so, I'll take a look at this tool, and thank you for that. And I'll reach out to have conversations that are not this sort of weird online and engagement that we're having.
Thank you, Angela. We look forward to your written comments. And like we mentioned, if you would like to set up one-on-one meetings with the board members, with Member Bhatia and Member Brostrom, please reach out to Sheena Brooks and we can set that up. Thank you so much.
So one of the things that I just heard was, if the community groups don't ask for a SEP, it's not the obligation of the business to go out there and recruit them. And it would take a lot of DTSC resources to work with a community group to bring them in to be interested in a SEP. But there's a penalty number of dollars sitting there waiting to either go to DTSC, go to the SEP. And it's conceivable that we could look at alternative ways of dealing with that penalty money, like a certain percentage to staff DTSC time to find community groups that could be part of a SEP. I mean, I think there are creative ways to approach this once we unpack it, you know? I mean, once you have a SEP, you're all in, but I just heard it being really clearly stated that the internal resources to go try to scout one up is not there. So I think that's something down the line that we could look at or talk to DTSC
I think
about.
April may have some answers for you. So
Right,
April's
great.
Thank
If
you.
you,
Could
April.
spotlight April again, please.
So,
No pressure, April.
yeah. So the step work, I'm just going to keep publicizing all of our website stuff. So we are revamping our enforcement and inspections website. So you can go there to find more information, and hopefully we're trying to make it clear, plain language, and hopefully user friendly. But for the SEP process, we've also been revamping that process and trying to simplify and make it a more efficient process moving forward. So one of the steps that we've taken is to form a memorandum of agreement with the Rose Foundation. So now facilities can choose to put funding into is the Rose Foundation, and the Rose Foundation will be funding projects in communities impacted by violations with that funding. It is a voluntary process from the facilities, but we are trying to address that by making the settlement discussions always include information about SEPs and really encourage facilities to put funding towards the SEP projects, because if we can get the funding, then it'll be a lot easier to solicit SEPs from various community groups across California. The other thing I wanted to speak to was Jeannie was the we have statutes that just dictate how our money has to go from penalty amounts. So it has to go to the TSCA fund by statutory requirement unless we can do the SEPs. And so that's kind of what limits our ability to direct the penalty funds. It prevents a conflict of interest, right? We're not paying ourselves to cite violations to get money, but it does go to the TSCA fund to clean up basically orphan sites. And so that's where the penalty monies are directed to go from the statutory requirements. So I don't know if you have any other questions.
No, that was great and helpful and reminded me of what you all have to navigate all the time. But thank you.
I wanted to offer a word of caution about as we continue to encourage SEPs for so many good reasons, we need to be careful about what the definition of return to compliance is where you have a SEP in place. And I'm sure April can see through to the finish line on how to do this, but sometimes a company would opt to not do a SEP because to pay the penalty and return to compliance can be speedier than if you define compliance at the end of completing the SEP. And so there might be complicated SEPs. There might be SEPs that take a year or two to get in place. If you're contracting with a local organization, you might be adding time. So if we want to encourage SEPs, we also need to keep in mind what we do to define compliance so that we don't work at cross purposes with ourselves.
I'm also just going to call on Dylan Clark, who's the OCI supervisor, to also provide some comments. Thank you, Dylan.
Yeah, hi. I just was going to add to April's that, that OCI, I mean, we don't have complete control over the SEPs, but when we bring it up in negotiations and talk about it with folks, it has definitely increased, a lot of SEPs that we run. So I do feel like, we do have control in these negotiations to kind of help steer it that way. And then a lot of SEPs that we've gotten in OCI have been developed during settlement negotiations. So the company will be like, oh, you are? And then they'll research their own nonprofits, and then they'll have the nonprofit apply for a SEP at DPSC. So it's kind of like a reverse order. The company decides they want to do a SEP, and then they'll reach out to a group that they're interested in. So that's just kind of laying out how some of the logistics have worked in this past year of doing the SEPs. So that's all I have.
So Dylan, let me just add that even if a facility suggests a SEP, the SEP has to be approved by DTSC. It has to meet our requirements for an acceptable SEP. So a facility can't choose a SEP that benefits their facility as a part of the SEP process. It has to be over and above any return to compliance issues. It needs to address the impacted community and with a nexus, hopefully, towards the violation at issue. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear that the facility.
Yeah, I'll give an example. We had like a company that was based in the Delta, and they wanted something to do with Save the Bay because it was near them and something that they appreciated. So Save the Bay then sent an application to April to see if, outlined a project, and then April reviewed it and had to approve it or not. So that's kind of how it worked.
Thank you both. That's really useful.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to continue on. It looks like we have Jenny. Your hand is raised. I'm going to ask you to unmute and please state your name and affiliation, please.
Hi, my name is Jenny Knack. I'm with Parents Against the Susanna Field Lab. And I'm not certain that I am certain that I'm not as up to speed on these permitting or SEPs issues as probably everyone else in this room. but I'm alerted to the potential for, well, what I'm hoping is not the potential for a SEPS that doesn't address or bring a permittee into compliance for, in my mind, I'm thinking a class 1 violation. If the SEPS does not help bring the permittee into full compliance, but allows them to do to fund a separate project, from a community member's point of view, the threat could remain the same or not completely mitigated for the community members. Meanwhile, we have a SEPS that could be beneficial to the permittee in terms of like a greenwashing effort. So they are getting to roll out a separate project that helps their PR while the stakeholders are still remaining under threat. And I guess I want to understand to what degree the compliance must be addressed. Is full compliance a condition of a SEPS project, I guess, is my question. Sorry if I beat around the bush 1,000 times to get to that.
Jenny, thank you so much for your question and your feedback. I'm just realizing that there are a lot of questions on SEPS, and it took Ingrid and I a while to fully understand SEPS. I would love to recommend that we bring SEPS as an agenda topic to a future board meeting so that the stakeholder ecosystem can understand what the current state of SEPS is, and we can have a robust discussion on where we can go forward.
I'm just going to call
That's
on
great,
April.
but in answer to Jenny's question, are we able to answer?
I'm just going to call on April again to see if.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to be, I want to clear up any miscommunication there is that SEPs are not a part of the compliance requirements. The facility is required to comply. As soon as the violation is issued, we put return to compliance. Enforcement is a parallel path to compliance, and sometimes compliance is addressed during enforcement, but many times that's because a facility has a legal objection to the violation. So they're saying like, it's not a hazardous waste, so we don't have to comply, and they're unwilling. We have to go through litigation or through enforcement in order to get them to see that it is a violation and comply. But SEPs are completely separate from compliance. I think that was spoken about previously is that technically the enforcement is not complete until the final SEP is completed. And so that can prevent facilities from wanting to fund a SEP because it lengthens their engagement with us and then lengthens the time that they are, their settlement is ongoing. But I just want to once again say compliance is not a part of the SEP process. We require compliance immediately after we cite violations. And so I just want to make sure that's clear because that's what we do. Go ahead, Dylan.
No, that the greenwashing, we don't really, it's not something that, we allow in the whole process. It's not like we're promoting that. We try and avoid that as much as possible.
Thank you both. Okay, well.
Okay. All right. And thank you all. Chuck, I acknowledge that your hand is raised, but I just want to check on other folks to see for anyone who has not had a chance to comment or ask questions yet. And our Spanish interpreters, if you could please let me know if there's anyone in the Spanish room that would like to comment or ask a question as well, that would be great. So I'm just going to do one last call for any in-room comments. Okay. And then for Zoom comments, again, you can raise your virtual hand through your Zoom application, or you can press *9 on your phone to raise your virtual hand. Okay, and we got confirmation. We don't have any Spanish comments. Thank you very much. So, okay, we will go ahead and Chuck, I'm going to ask you to unmute. So please accept the invitation and you can proceed with your comment or questions.
Yeah, this is Chuck again. I forgot to bring up when I was on board last time, this whole issue of SEPs. And I haven't thought about SEPs in a long time, but I recall years ago when the whole concept was coming up that, well, number one, that it didn't necessarily affect your return compliance. Return to compliance, as I think you just said, is a separate issue. But there's no requirement on who could do the SEP. For example, you could have a coalition of businesses that want to do a project to improve a certain area that may not be directly related to the compliance issue, but would buy some goodwill with the department, and you could have a group trying to put together a project that would benefit everybody, and that could be a possible SEP. And I just wanted to confirm, is my thinking still correct on that, or are you now thinking that SEPs are only available to people that have had a compliance issue?
SEPs are only available to folks that are paying penalties. So when they've had the most significant violations, we seek enforcement, and up to 50% of the penalties that we are assessing can go to a SEP, to fund a SEP. We do have, sorry, go ahead.
The people receiving the SEP are not the ones not compliant. The people are outside. That has nothing to do with it.
Most of the time, the SEP applicants or the SEP recipients are third-party organizations that are unrelated to the business, and they have to be a 501c3 or a county, and so we do vet that and make sure that the folks receiving the SEPs are an appropriate recipient with a project that meets the requirements of our policy.
But my thinking is that it's still pretty flexible about who could actually do a SEP. It's just a matter of where the money comes from and who's willing to step up and do it.
So we have an application process, and people would submit a project, and the facility would chooses which project to fund. We do have requirements for which projects the facilities can fund. They need to be located in an area near the facility or near the violation in order to ensure that the impacted community is receiving the benefits of the SEP project. And so that's part of the requirements that we have. But the projects are varied. And if you go on our website and you look at the SEP, there's the list of our SEP projects that are available, and you can see the various projects that are throughout the state. And if anybody knows of anybody that could submit a SEP, please do. We are getting SEPs funded now, and so we would like to have more projects as a part of our SEP list. So go ahead and apply through the process. It's on our website. I'm going to keep plugging things, y'all.
Thank you, April. Anything else, Dylan, to add to that, or you good?
No, I'm good. I just think that's like the SEPs, anyone can apply for a SEP. So any group wants to apply for a SEP, feel free. And then it'll be on our list. And then a company that has a violation in that area, they would, then say they're interested in that SEP. So people that pay the SEPs are the violating companies. The people that receive the SEPs could be anyone that wants to do a project that April approves.
Dylan, just to clarify, because I thought I heard April say that it had to be a 501c3 or a government
right.
entity.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, April and Dylan, for answering several of those questions. Clearly, there's a lot of questions and interests around SEP, so we've taken that back as an action item, and at a future board meeting, we will work with DTSC to have a more robust presentation, since there's clearly much interest around SEPs. So thank you so much. I'll hand it back to Courtney to check to see if there's any more comments.
Thank you so much. Any additional comments, either in person or via Zoom? With Zoom, you can raise your virtual hand or press *9 on your phone if you would like to comment or ask questions to the board during this workshop. Last call. Okay. It looks like there are no further public comments or questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Courtney. Do our subcommittee members, including Swati, Ingrid, Sushma, have anything you want to add or close with?
First, I want to close with a thank you. I think we had a lot of robust discussion on several topics, and you've given us a lot to think about. We will regroup as a subcommittee and take into account all the feedback we received and propose any amendments to the work we've done before we bring it back to the rest of the board. Those of you that committed to following up in writing, could you please just give us in writing your feedback, and also please let us know if you appreciate or in any of the metrics that you see today in the KPI dashboard. If there's something in particular that jumps out at you that you would like to retain, please let us know that in your written comments as well. And then again, we are open for one-on-one conversations, written feedback. Please reach out. What we bring back in March, we want to make sure everything, all the voices in this room and those on Zoom, plus those voices that are of people that are not with us today that are interested in this topic, we want to make sure we incorporate all your voices in the next revision that we bring back to the board. Thank you.
Ingrid?
Ditto. But particularly, I mean, one of the lenses that we wanted to use here is, what are those metrics that are of most interest to the stakeholders? So if there are metrics that are missing that you think are particularly important to understanding, DTSC's performance, we would love to hear that. Again, if there are things on the existing dashboard that are being tracked that you think are particularly important to assessing DTSC's performance, please let us know. We want this to be a tool that is useful to the stakeholders and meaningful. So again, the feedback we received today is very helpful. I look forward to kind of thinking about it through more, as well as receiving additional written comments moving forward. So thank you for everyone's participation today.
Swathi?
And just sharing, we've started out with the hazardous waste management program. Next after that, we're going to be doing safer consumer products, then site mitigation, then some of the sub-programs such as OEE. So this is going to be an ongoing process. So if you're only seeing, oh, why are there only a handful of metrics here? It's because this is just one part of DTSC, and we're going to be working over the next couple of years on the other portions. So this is going to be an ongoing process. I know.
Yes.
Thank you.
Forever. I think, Georgette, I missed your comment. Sorry about that.
I do have just a question. Because some of the engagement from the public kind of had me thinking. But in terms of process, if we had any recommendations, should we put them in writing and send them to the committee, or are we
No,
to
you-
wait
you'd
till
send it to me.
March?
You
Okay,
can send it to me.
okay, thank you.
Anything else? Okay, unless there's a pressing question that came to you in the last 30 seconds, I will say we are concluded. Courtney, can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second by Ingrid. Do you want to call the vote, Courtney, since I'm not supposed to?
Sure. Member Bhatia,
Yes.
Member Brostrom,
Yes.
Member Gomez,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hacker,
Yes.
Chair Rizzo.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. The workshop is officially adjourned at 3:20 p.m.
As a reminder, we have a full board meeting tomorrow, so we will see you bright and early at 9 a.m. for our full board meeting.